When researching for my novel, Tyler's Only Friend, which is about a fictional active shooting, I stumbled on several real cases where good guys with guns confronted the perpetrator, and I thought it'd be a good idea to briefly go over some notable cases in this video. Then I'll look into the numbers to try to find out how common they are. I'll start with a case which involves lots of civilians taking up arms. In 1966, at the University of Texas campus in Austin, Charles Whitman climbed to the observation deck of a tower with multiple weapons and fired at people inside the tower and below, killing over a dozen and injuring even more. Given this is Texas, and the police back then didn't have the firepower they have now, many civilians nearby grabbed their firearms from their vehicles and returned fire at Whitman, forcing him to take cover and hindering his ability to take more lives. An eyewitness reported seeing several men firing hunting rifles at the tower and clouds of pulverized stone coming from the tower where the bullets were impacting. One witness had a story that some friends were in a cafe, and a man with a hunting rifle came in, bought a six-pack of beer, and walked right back out. One person set up an M14 rifle on a tripod. Someone gave a reporter a handgun. Some students used the covering fire to run across open ground and bring victims back to safety. Another civilian used a telescope and called out Whitman's location to officers returning fire. One officer actually drove a student back to his apartment so the student could retrieve his rifle and then drove him to a store to buy ammo. Another civilian, Alan Crum, was given a rifle by police and was part of the group of officers that made it to the top floor of the tower. In the confusion, many officers believed Crum was an off-duty officer. Others came close to shooting Crum, believing he was the sniper, as he was in civilian clothes and carrying a rifle. Crum did not shoot Whitman, but he did accidentally fire his gun on the observation deck and distract Whitman. There were more downsides to the civilian gunfire than negligent discharges. Some civilians fired handguns or shotguns from the ground at the observation deck, almost 30 stories high and far out of range. There was a fear that one of the bullets landing short of the deck could go through a window and hit a student, professor, or responding officer inside the tower. The chaotic return fire made the response from the police more difficult as they coordinated moving into the tower, and then even after police took out Whitman, the civilians weren't aware and continued firing. The police waved a handkerchief from the tower, and it still took a while for the civilian gunfire to stop. The damage to the limestone of the tower was still visible decades later, though many of the holes had been filled in. In 2021, in Denver, Colorado, a police officer was shot and killed by a gunman in a planned attack on police officers. A Good Samaritan nearby, Johnny Hurley, heard the gunshots, drew a concealed handgun, and shot the gunman dead. Another police officer who arrived thought that Johnny was the active shooter and shot and killed him. The gunman's motive for ambushing the police was his outspoken hatred for police officers. He had watched hours and hours of police misconduct videos on YouTube for years while never holding a steady job. The officer who killed Johnny, the Good Samaritan, was cleared of any wrongdoing by prosecutors. In 1997, in Mississippi, a 16-year-old named Luke Woodham murdered his mother, then went to his high school, and with a .30-30 rifle, shot and killed 2 students and injured several others. His rifle jammed, and he left the school and got in his mother's car. The assistant principal at the school, who was also a member of the National Guard, ran to his truck and got his handgun and pointed it at the shooter. Woodham had little experience driving a car. He had left the emergency brake on, and with the assistant principal screaming at him with a gun, Woodham lost control of the car and got it stuck. The assistant principal held Woodham at gunpoint until the police arrived. There was an elementary school and junior high school nearby, and Woodham still had ammo, so the assistant principal may have prevented further violence. The teenager, who was overweight, wore glasses, and was very shy, had been badly bullied for years. He wrote that the reason for his attack was revenge for being mistreated. There's a lot more to this tragedy, but I'm keeping these brief to focus on the actions of the good guys with guns. At a school dance in Pennsylvania in 1998, 14-year-old Andrew Worst used a .25 caliber semi-auto handgun to kill a teacher and shot and wounded several others at random. The dance was at a banquet hall, and the hall's owner heard the gunshots, got his own 12-gauge shotgun, and found the attacker. At a distance of roughly 40 yards, Wurst pointed his handgun at the owner, and the owner pointed his shotgun back at the 14-year-old. The owner and another person told the shooter to drop his weapon, which he did. The owner and others at the dance restrained Wurst until police arrived. The owner said he held off on firing because the shooter was a kid. Although Wurst did want to die, he stated that a shotgun from that distance wouldn't have killed him, and he didn't want to be put in a coma, which was why he put down his handgun. Wurst also said that this world isn't real, and that he was real, but everybody else was unreal and programmed like robots. So he believed it was not wrong to kill others because they were unreal, and they were out to get him. A forensic psychiatrist concluded that Wurst was psychotic with paranoid ideation, and did not understand that what he had done was wrong due to his delusions. Prosecutors and police disagreed and claimed that he was faking mental illness and had committed the crime for notoriety. The good guy with the gun here showed a lot of bravery and restraint in facing down an active shooter and not firing. He saved lives. He confronted Wurst right after Wurst had gone outside the dance hall to reload his handgun. In 2002, at the Appalachian School of Law in Virginia, a former student who had flunked out of the school came back with a .380 semi-auto handgun. He killed a dean, a professor, and a student, and injured a couple of the other students. There are differing accounts of what exactly happened next, but I'll give a quick summary. 2 students who were off-duty police officers each ran to their cars, grabbed their firearms, and confronted the shooter, along with some unarmed students. The shooter had either already put his gun down before the armed students faced the shooter, or put the gun down when ordered to by the armed students. The shooter then punched one of the unarmed students, and a different unarmed student ran up and tackled the shooter. Others joined in, and one of the armed students placed him in handcuffs until police arrived. There also seems to be a disagreement over whether the shooter's firearm still had ammo left when the armed students faced him. Gun rights advocates claim that many of the media reports of the incident did not include the students arming themselves to stop the shooter. The gunman was a Nigerian immigrant who blamed the FBI, CIA, and Vice President Cheney for his issues. He was declared incompetent for trial and ordered to take psychiatric treatment. A couple of years later, he had been diagnosed paranoid schizophrenic and was declared competent, and is now serving multiple life sentences. 2 of the gunman's sons would go on to play in the NFL. In 2007, a young man went to a Christian missionary school in Colorado called Youth with a Mission. He opened fire there, killing 2 and injuring others. Later in the same day, the young man went to a church at a different location that also had a Youth with a Mission office and opened fire in the parking lot, killing 2 more people. He then entered the church. However, the church at the second location had heard about the first shooting earlier in the day and had stepped up their security. A church member, Jean Assam, a former police officer, volunteered to be a security guard and brought her personal 9mm handgun to the church. When the gunman came in, Jean identified herself and fired her weapon 10 times, hitting the gunman multiple times, and he fell down. The gunman then took his own life. Mass had just ended, so there were still plenty of people inside. The good guy with a gun, or good woman with a gun in this case, likely saved many lives. The gunman, who had been homeschooled and raised in a very Christian family, had been kicked out of Youth with a Mission years before, and had been sending the program hate mail. In 2019, at a church in Texas, a man took out a 12-gauge shotgun and shot and killed 2 people. The leader of the church's volunteer security team then shot the gunman in the head, the only part of the gunman he could see over the churchgoers in the pews. The entire incident lasted 6 seconds, and the service was live-streamed, so clips of the violence were posted all over social media. The gunman, who had been to the church before and received food donations, had entered the church wearing a fake beard and a wig, catching the attention of the security team. One of the security team members sat behind him, and when the shotgun was pulled, he drew his handgun, but was killed by a shotgun blast. The gunman had a long history of crime, violence, mental illness, and homelessness. To name a few of his previous troubles, he had been charged with felony assault, arson, and had been committed to a psychiatric facility. I wanted to go beyond looking at individual cases to try to find how common it is for armed citizens to confront active shooters. I found some FBI reports about active shooter incidents in the US, and a report covering 20 years from 2000 to 2019 found that of 345 active shooters, 4 were killed by citizens, a rate of a little over 1%. I added the numbers from the reports covering 2020 to 2023 and found that 12 shooters were killed by citizens of 547 overall shooters, which is about 2.2%. This does not include cases where armed civilians thwarted the shooting but did not eliminate the shooter. Several of the cases in this video involved armed civilians who forced the perpetrator to surrender and held them until police arrived, or fired at the shooter and impeded their movement, or only injured them. Studies on what percentage of active shootings are stopped by armed citizens vary wildly. One found that in less than 3% of cases, civilians fire back. Another, from the Crime Prevention Research Center, had a rate of about 36%. The difference in the numbers come from how cases are classified. There can be a lot of gray areas in what can be described as thwarted active shootings. Most police departments don't keep track of active shooting cases, so there is no database to analyze, and researchers have to search the internet and newspapers, which can also lead to different numbers. The center that had the 36% rate has a list of cases they found on their website. Some of them don't sound like thwarted active shootings to me, and others fall into that gray area. I'll go over a few examples. One of the cases involved an armed man at a restaurant who demanded a father hand over his possessions and then pointed a gun at the father's children. The father then shot and killed the armed man. A justified use of armed self-defense, but this sounds like a robbery, not a thwarted active shooting. In another case, a man killed his ex-wife and a man she was dating in a restaurant parking lot. The perpetrator went back to his vehicle when an armed citizen shot and injured him. This sounds like a targeted crime and not one where the gunman is actively seeking out more people to shoot. There are more situations that involve an angry person with a gun in a public place, sometimes making threats or firing their gun into the air, who are confronted by armed citizens. Others involve disputes at bars that escalated to gunshots. I'll leave links to the sources I found. Based on my research for my novel, the number is definitely more than 3% and less than 36%, though I had far less time and resources than the FBI and these other organizations. They were more common than I had thought, and the media do seem to give them less attention, with a few exceptions. This could be because when armed citizens intervene, the body count is likely to be small, and the media are going to give more attention to crimes that have high body counts. An armed citizen stopping a shooter after 1 or 2 have been killed is not going to make the headlines like one who wasn't stopped and took the lives of 20 or 30 people. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please consider checking out my novel, Tyler's Only Friend, available on Amazon. Any feedback is appreciated.